Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is the Caribbean Business Review. My name is Joseph Cox, and today we are pleased to have with us as our guest Nievia Ramsundar. And Nievia is the outgoing executive director of the CARICOM Competition Commission, an attorney at law with 25 plus years experience in all sorts of areas, from telecommunications, right, the whole gamut. In fact, Nievia, as I welcome you to the program, is there any area of law, corporate law, in that respect that you're not familiar with?
Wouldn't say that I love insurance, and you restricted me absolutely to corporate law. I don't know criminal law. That's the area of my sister, who is a PhD in international crime. So I leave that to her realm. I'm just corporate.
No, and that's fine. That's fine. But what we wanted to talk to you about today was the whole matter of competition policy, and how it is actually rolling out throughout this region. And in fact, what are some of the global best practices that one can look to? Because to be honest with you, let me start by putting this within this context. Part of the reality, the physical, geographic reality of this region is that they're small countries. I mean, obviously, everything is relative. But with that sort of physical layout, the truth be spoken is that it is seemingly more geared towards monopoly structures in a lot of cases, because just for scale purposes, it seems to be geared towards monopolies or duopolies and the sort of restrictive market environment. Now, within that framework, how viable is our competition framework? How viable is, how we treat with that sort of dynamic?
Okay, well, first of all, when we say competition policy, let's analyze what we mean by competition policy, right? Because some people, when they say competition policy, they mean the policy that will inform legislation and framework for competition regulation in a market. That is not competition policy is. Competition policy is every single living macroeconomic policy that can inform competition behavior, and competitiveness. Taxation, intellectual property, data protection, investment, trade, customs, you name it. This is all part of the toolkit of competition policy. And it is important for us to understand that, because we tend to make decisions at a national and regional level on critical macroeconomic issues without the presence of experts in competition regulation, and it is causing a severe gap. You talk about global best practice. Take a look at the European Union and the European Commission. It takes literally no decision of an economic nature without the Director General of Competition being present in the room, advising and scrutinizing policies. They actually have a separate committee in the DG Comp where they scrutinize policies. When the EU issued its digital agenda, a critical crux, the crux of the foundation stone of that was the competition element, not just the regulatory element. So panning out, when in the region we start to think about competition and we don't ascribe to the competition authority, or we don't ascribe any preference to establishing a competition authority in our countries, we are actually shooting ourselves in the foot. And when we say why our region can't have a single market and economy, why can't we face up to the other trading blocks? Well, therein lies the answer. We are missing a key component. So that's the first thing based on your discussion point. The second thing that you raised is that competition focuses more on the monopoly or the duopoly. Now, let's acknowledge that in the region, because of our very small size, there are certain fields that, of course, from the economic perspective, which you will know very well, we have to have a natural monopoly. So for water, we can't have 5 or 6 water providers in a territory like Dominica or even Trinidad, because I know Trinidad, we like to say we're big, but we are still smaller than Cuba and Jamaica. Possibly Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, These places can have more than one water provider, but just by the mere fact of the effort, time, and cost to lay the grid down for water, for electricity, for gas, for these heavy duty things, it's a natural monopoly for size. So that's where regulation in the sector comes in. And that's important because it helps make sure that the players in the field are keeping alert to standards and they are keeping their consumers happy. When you come out now into the manufacturing sector, when you come out into services, trading goods, that's where the ballpark gets a little bit bigger. And that's where you think about competition in terms of the fact that you need choice, you need to innovate the market, you need to incentivize players to come into the market. It's not Wild West where you had one general store. So we do have firms in the Caribbean right now that are conglomerates, the way Procter and Gamble would be, the way Unilever would be. We do have some conglomerates where they've got everything under the sun. And is it helping us or is it harming us? We've had a wide swath in the region of mergers and acquisitions over the past 8 years in the financial sector, in the past 10 years in the telecommunications sector, and in the groceries and other small goods. We've had some massive takeovers and, we just sit down there and we realize we're going to a shop one day, a mom and pop shop, and it's no more. But, a brand from another island is all over, that shop is all over the Caribbean region. So there is a focus on how to maintain consumer choice. So we don't mind that you are the only brand. But if it is that you have become the only brand because there was no legislation in place to govern how you become that brand, then we at least have to make sure that the consumers have choice while only going to you. So if you are the monopoly, then we have to make sure that there's choice, that there's market innovation, and that there is no harm. There is no rule in competition policy or law that tells you that it's wrong to be a monopoly. You can. If it is that you're competitive enough and you're good enough, yes, great. But then you can't harm the market and you can't harm the consumers. So it can't be like 20 years ago when you make a phone call and you had to pay $20 for an international minute. It has to be, and you hear,
Yeah.
right?
Trust me.
So
Yeah.
this is the whole point about competition policy and legislation.
But then, while you're saying all of that, what comes readily to mind is the fact that there is market dominance in a number of the sectors. That's absolutely irrefutable.
Unavoidable.
And there is predatory pricing. But then, is it that the legislative component, is it that the legal underpinning is not robust enough to treat with it, or is it, or what are the issues why we are not seeing a more, how should I say, strident form of intervention, protection within the market?
Okay, so 3 things. Number 1, regionally you have a weak framework. We do have Chapter 8 in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas that allows for some small degree of cross-border intervention, but you have not yet passed or enacted in the treaty system a mergers policy. So regionally, we can't help you when someone, let's say from Antigua, decides to take over the business in Barbados, right? We can't help you there yet. And there are 2 reasons why we can't help you there yet. It's because, and it feeds into my second point, you don't have national legislation. In the region, in the CARICOM region, we are not the European Union. So that's one thing for us to understand. We are not a full regional integration group. We are basically just a customs union. So when the EU can take a decision and pass legislation that is immediately and directly implementable in their countries, we don't have that. So we have to get around the table, and that brings me now to my third point, where we have national supremacy, national sovereigns sitting down around the table and agreeing lengthily on whether they will apply and agree to certain policy measures. And then you have to wait on those policy measures to be implemented in the national countries. And very often they don't have extraterritorial application. So it's a joint thing. And when we say competition, the partner to competition is usually consumer protection. In Jamaica, you are lucky. You have both very well entrenched in your market economy. You are the oldest competition authority, and you're also one of the oldest consumer authorities. And right now you are merging the two into a joint competition and consumer body. So good luck with that. Barbados, Trinidad, and Guyana also have framework in both competition and consumer legislations, not the rest. The OECS member states are only just coming up and signing on to consumer legislation. Earlier this year, together with the OECS Commission, CCC did a lot of in-country work, training and building up the public sector in how to implement competition legislation, utilizing the existing structure of the new consumer legislation that they have, and also expanding sector regulation to include competition. So we have severe gaps at the regional level. We have severe gaps at the national level when it comes to legislation, and we have severe gaps at the firm level. Because if you don't have legislation to compel the firm to have a
They're not going to do
regulated
it.
compliance office or to have a consumer affairs office, they're not going to do it. Because basically the firm can behave as it wishes without having any impacting constraints unless it is by increased competition by other firms. And then you have to start behaving because the consumer can go to another firm where they are treated better. So that's really what causes the gap in the region. We aren't on an equivocal basis with the European Union or with America or with Australia or with any of the other people we like to look at. Far cry from Singapore. I think in the region we tend to like to tout around Singapore and the Asian countries. Culturally, that's not where we need to look. Because culturally, their modus operandi is one of restraint, one of rules, and one of a very high level of respect and one of hierarchy. We don't have that system here. Let's peg ourselves against someone like COMESA CCC. COMESA CCC, the competition and consumer body in COMESA, was established at the same time as the CARICOM CCC. They are leaps and bounds ahead of us. All of their member states have legislation. They are taking real, live, direct mergers and acquisitions, decisions in the digital economy and in other matters. What's the difference? The difference is, number one, yes, Africa has more money than us. But number two, the COMESA was established along the line similar to the EU. So there are stronger regional integration movement. So are you getting some of the thrust of what I'm saying here? And we'll come
Yes,
when we deal with
indeed.
the future outlook. How we established ourselves as a regional entity, as a regional integration movement, is no longer viable for the global challenges that we are facing now. We have to rethink the actual model of our integration if we have to survive against the forces of competition. Look at big tech.
But hold on. What you have painted, frankly speaking,
Yes.
is a rather stark picture of where we are, and the sad truth of it, and it raises the question of whether or not this is just is it a case of ineptitude in treating with the issue, or is that a matter of deliberate? Is it deliberate? Because honestly,
No,
I'm looking at it because in
no.
some of the countries, we do know that, for example, a competition commission, all of a sudden you have whole sectors that do no longer or don't fall under their remit, which makes no sense.
So it
And you're
comes,
trying to understand what is going on. So, for example, you have things like telecommunications in one respect. You have other areas like the banks, etc., etc. These are controversial in a number of areas between fees and service qualities, etc., etc. All sorts of, we call it, the collusion in terms of pricing, etc., etc. These are issues that will be ripe for intervention. But when you interrogate it, you hear it's not our remit. So what is your remit?
so the thing is that I want you to go broad before you go narrow.
All right.
When you look at us, you have to build in our culture and our history. We are coming from a certain defined historical past and a colonial past. And it means that even when we tried with the federation, it didn't work. We had to get very innovative when we came down to becoming a CARICOM. And even when we became CARICOM, we had to rework it and revise it in 2001 so that we can have a CARICOM that also focused on single market and economy. But the premise and the basis has always been that we would remain national sovereigns coming around the table to talk. It was never going to be a regional sovereignty and a regional supremacy. So point one, we don't have the level that we need to start making unified policies in the region. The second thing is that traditionally, as we developed each sector either was self-regulated, so you had water companies and electrical companies being self-regulated, and then when regulation started to be shaped in the days of Thatcher, we then started to have regulatory supervisors or regulators, and we had Regulated Industries Commission and Public Utilities Commissions that dealt with these agencies. And the difference with what we would call wide competition market powers and regulatory is this. Competition powers gives the body wide supervision of the market. We don't determine standards and we don't determine conduct. We just set rules, and if you break them, then we intervene for consumer welfare. Regulatory bodies have to set standards, they have to govern your conduct, and they penalize you and they authorize you to perform certain things. It's two different core functions. The gap happens when your national legislation exempts these sector regulators and they don't also give them sector-specific competition powers. So that's the problem. The problem there, which is a very simple one to cure, do a miscellaneous amendment act, and all of your regulators that refer to only one sector, allow them to be competition specific in their area. If you don't have legislation, if you have competition legislation, give them the power and tell them to do so in consultation with the Fair Trade Commission, and in all things that are cross-border, to be recognized by Chapter 8 of the treaty by the CCC, so that the CCC can liaise with that person directly if there's a cross-border matter in that sector. Quick fix.
But is there a political will to get that fix done? Frankly.
So the political will is what is critical. And the thing is that we have a high churn in the region. We have a high churn because we have a lot of elections in our member states. And even if you may have administrations being returned to power, the same players may not be part of those administrations. So yes, you have change in administrations, but then even if you have the same party coming back, you have a change in who may be responsible. So you have a high churn in opinions, a high change in priorities. And the political will at the moment is at the point where they are actively considering mechanisms to bring this into being because of the fact that you're renegotiating a new economic partnership agreement and because of the fact that we just don't have the tools right now. If you look at big tech and digital tech, the EU and America can call these players to the table and tell them this is how you're going to treat our countries. We don't have that power. And the only way to have that power is to give ourselves the armor that we need through legislation and through agreements.
But is it that we don't have the power, or is
We
it
don't.
that we choose not to exercise the power?
We don't have the power. We don't have any power of compulsion for external parties unless it is country by country or multilateral agreement. You will get the power if you sit down as CARICOM and you negotiate with them into some sort of multilateral agreement or as country to country and a bilateral. But as of now, you have nothing in the RTC that gives you regulatory powers or compulsion powers to bring somebody to the table to enter the region into the market. That's why I tell you, we are only a customs union. We sit down and we agree CETs, taxes, and customs. But we cannot pass laws, we cannot enforce laws, and we cannot subpoena anyone. We can't tell anybody. We can't authorize you to come into the region. If you have to go into the EU, you have to go through a lot of hoops. We don't have it here. So that's the gap.
So therefore, what you're really saying to me is that, at least for the foreseeable future, we're stuck with the predatory pricing and all of these really questionable, these dubious charges that are imposed on us from the various financial institutions. We're probably doomed to subpar development because our telecommunications providers en masse are declaring that 5G is not viable in the region. There's no business case for it. Forget the simple fact that little Bermuda has managed to implement 5G, but there's no business case for it. So from what you're saying, we kind of just have to hug it up.
Not at all. Listen, the thing is, when it comes to, first of all, banking, you have a working system of central banks who are your main banking supervisors. The OECS has the ECCB. First and foremost, for those countries who have competition bodies, who have consumer bodies, they can interact with the financial supervisors to get things done. Secondly, at the CARICOM level, as you know, because while you were still Assistant General, the project for the Financial Consumer Protection Regulations was undertaken and it's finished. And member states are now actively considering working this document into their national laws so that you will have firm, set regulations for consumer benefits and how you price and how you conduct your business as a bank once it's entered into the systems by the central bank. So that's the good thing. The second issue on the G, there are numerous elements to that situation that can't be overestimated. Number one, you have different islands, different terrains, and different sizes. And the cost to set out that infrastructure has to be borne by someone. And unless and until you bring all the players together and they agree that this is going to be the cost basis for how we roll out 5G, that's going to be the problem. What happened in the EU and the UK is that the actual countries they provided a fund for this heavy infrastructure. Because of the different costing mechanisms and the telecommunications regulation in the Caribbean, it's going to be hard to recoup 5G. That's one thing. The second thing is that within a matter of a decade, we have moved in the Caribbean from 2G to 4G LTE, something towing the line of 5G. Gone are the days where you can take your money as a provider and plunk it into a network and have a 10, 20 years to recoup it. You don't have it anymore. So it's very expensive now to spend the money, put down that kit, put down that network, and you don't have the years to recoup it. So that is now why it becomes an issue of how do we share this cost? Because the consumer alone can't have it. So you need to have an infeeding from the region, some sort of fund from the regional bodies, from the regional governments into their network providers. You have to have an agreement of how those networks will be shared, interconnected, and accessed from a regulatory perspective. Hear it. And you also have that elephant in the room that CTU and the providers are looking at, which is, do you look at those who are going to be using your 5G the most, namely your big tech players contributing what's called a fair share? So there are many, many issues.
Good luck with that argument, because I am yet to see which politician will have the nerve to look on their populace and tell them that they must pay for WhatsApp. Yeah, I wait to see that conversation any day.
So some of the other member states actually have packages through one of the providers, an external provider to the region, where your data packages provide access, depending on the amount you pay, for something like WhatsApp and Facebook. So you get internet access on your basic data, but if you want access when you're roaming or at home to things like WhatsApp and Facebook that will cut into their telephony line of business, that's a little bit more. That's different packaging. But you see, the challenge I have with that type of reasoning is that, for example, upon introduction, because of the obvious question, so how come Bermuda can do it and others can't? But leave that for a second. One of the reasons, or one of the issues with this is that with the introduction of 5G, upon almost immediate introduction, you open a whole new raft of services that can be offered. Not just nationally, globally. So in other words, the market is there for expanded usage. You do recoup your funding of the data, because all of us know that data charges they're not cheap.
So you recoup off your data and other attendant services that would be facilitated at this point in time. That's two. Thirdly, for a lot of the actual instruments that the people use, they will have to change them out over time to take advantage of the service. There's another stream of income there. So to be truthful, I don't know that I buy into this argument that there is no business case. If you assume that the field is static, that nothing is going to happen, there'll be no, more movement in the market, then fine, you can always argue that. But the obvious truth is that in every single jurisdiction, upon introduction, this thing has the service levels have jumped considerably in all sorts of areas. And while we hear dithering about 5G, you're talking about people. I've read something the other day says six plus or seven. They reach some level like that in parts of the Asian countries. The point is, my thing is simply is that are we just making excuses for bad behavior, for predatory behavior?
No, the telecommunications industry, I'm going to come back again to disruption. All firms experience disruption and innovation. The telecommunications industry is particularly subject to disruptive forces. The difference you're talking about with Asia and Europe, and even some of the countries who may have the smaller countries who roll it out, is the fact that they have granddaddies. They have granddaddies in the fact that they have funds that they can access to help them get the seed funding to start that build out, in addition to what the networks will put onto it. Because if you are the sheer cost of building out networks and not having the space of time to recoup your cost, that is what is killing our small region. Because you have to look at our numbers. We have populations under 50,000 in most of our islands. So you are looking at putting out a cost, and we have mountainous terrain. Coming from that background of public utilities, of telecommunications regulation, of utilities infrastructure, to plummet that cost and to not have sufficient time to recoup it, that is the problem. And only some of us have universal service funds that we can access those funds to say we can assist people with disabilities or socially disadvantaged persons to change out their own personal instruments, their phones, their computers, to be able to receive 5G. For most of us, what we have to do when we are introducing new technology is we have to delay and extend the old technology for a length of time. Even with computers, Joseph, in Jamaica, in a lot of these countries, we're bringing in computers that are second generation, that are refurbished, because our people can't afford the fresh ones.
Yeah, and therefore what we're doing is that we're hindering our own development, which so it becomes a circuitous conversation.
It's a circuitous conversation, but on the cost of rolling out these things versus the consumer benefit, we need to weigh the pros and cons. But having adequate regulation and standard setting is where your key is, to ensure that the consumers, for the type of service that we are able to provide, that it is a good quality, it is a good cost, and it's not predatory. Now, if there are islands now, after Telecommunications Annex and after so many of us having telecommunications regulators and consumer legislation, if we still have predatory pricing in the telecommunications market, then we do need to have more discussions with the CTU at the CARICOM level and at the ITU to see what we can do. Because in these regional bodies, we take agreements at the level of what kind of spectrum we have access to, what kind of spectrum we want to use for services, and costing and the levels of services, quality assurance. So we do need to look at that level, and it becomes important when you look at issues of the digital economy and the fact that we are expecting now to trade in goods and services online, that we are expected to utilize higher levels of artificial intelligence, and there's a gap. There's a huge digital divide in our region with access to the same levels as the rest of the world. But that said, I want to just give you a little rainbow. We keep thinking that, everything everywhere else in the world is better. But we're actually a little bit more advanced than places that are very huge with a lot of landmass like America. Because there are pockets in America that have our service level, but most of America runs on normal cable with normal telephones because it's just too far to get higher level service there. So we have to wait in the balance of what we can and cannot do, what we can fund, and how we can get the funds. And mind you, with the wars and the different geopolitical issues happening right now in the world, protectionism is high. So getting funding from other parties is also going to be a little bit more difficult. So we have, as a region, to maximize who we
Yeah.
can get assistance from.
Yeah. No, well, the thing is this, because we have to wrap this up in a second. But the question really would be from where you sit, because you have been exposed in this market in varying sectors. What would be your probably, I don't know, top 2, 3 recommendations if we could effect meaningful change that will impact our not just now, but over the medium to long term? What would be those 3 priority areas that you would identify for our policymakers or political directorate, frankly speaking?
Number one, revisit the Treaty of Chaguaramas. The current framework does not help you. It is unworkable, and the things that you want to do within the region, you cannot do it with a fake integration movement. You either go full or not at all. Customs union is no longer what is needed. You need to have the powers at hand to be able to take decision at the level of heads, have legislation, and have it immediately and directly able to be effected in national member states. So number one is revisit your structure as a Caribbean community. Number two, revisit your structure of having a Caribbean community and an organization of Eastern Caribbean states. We are too small, and having any form of fragmentation hinders how we can operate. So if we retain a two-tier structure of smaller islands and more developed islands, that's fine, but we have to get more defined interlinkages between whatever version of the Caribbean community we agree the Caribbean community looks like and how it works with the OECS. It can't just be pie in the sky. And the third thing is that we have to learn when we sit at the table and we sign an agreement and we have obligations that we pass the legislation and we implement the legislation. And if we are doing that, we do it, I'm going to give me a fourth priority. The fourth priority is when you are in that room and you have private sector organizations stating their case, you must have your watchdog in the form of the Competition Commission alongside to scrutinize the recommendations and to help you pass the correct policy for the region and by extension, the member states.
So as it stands now, so you have no seat. You have no seat at the table. So you what? You react after the fact.
You react after the fact if you see it in the newspaper. If it happens to
Wonderful.
if it happens to decision-making table when you're at it in the Council of Trade. This year we actually stopped getting decisions that were not related to CCC. So you may sit in the room, but you don't actually get the record, which is going to make it difficult for investigations. Because usually, for example, let's look at issues like brown sugar and honey. We just keep checking that, and salt. We just keep checking that to make sure that it's not veering into the realm of anti-competition. If we don't have it, then we can't help you because there's no system of freedom of information under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. So, as I say, the core functionality, the core platform of what the Caribbean community is, needs to be revisited urgently if you want it to work. And if you want it to work the way COMESA is working, don't even think of the European Union because they have billions and millions. And I know Africa has the same thing as well. But let's just look at little COMESA. Let's just look at the leaps and bounds that the ASEAN community is doing. We need some homework, and we need to move beyond thinking that trade is the be all and end all and not connected to anything else, Joseph. As an old trade man, I've given your words there.
No.
Trade is dependent on investments, subsidies, humor, everything.
Of
AI.
course.
You
Really have to learn.
have to
It's amazing.
compromise somewhere, yes, but be careful what you are compromising on as a region.
Yeah, but no, I hear you, but this is just amazing. That's all I can say to you at this point in time. This is amazing. Anyway, Nievia Ramsundar, outgoing executive director at the CARICOM Competition Commission, and of course, attorney at law of note for a couple of decades. I'm not going to make you look too old.
Yeah, I already said it, so that's fine. When I look as good as I do, I can say my
Good
age.
work it is. Indeed, my friend, indeed. Thanks so much for your time. I do hope that we'll be able to have you back on this program from time to time to walk us through some of the various serious issues that confront us, not just as a region, but frankly speaking, where some of the countries are concerned, to offer that kind of guidance that is so obviously needed. So thank you so much for
Thank you for
your
having
time.
me, Joseph. Thank you for
My
having me.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox & Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox & Associates. Insight, experience, impact.